Evelyn Morgan had always considered her apartment a sanctuary from the world. Tucked away on a quiet street in a mid-sized city, her one-bedroom loft was her retreat, a place where she could read, paint, and reflect. One rainy evening, as she sat before her antique mirror inherited from her grandmother, she noticed something odd. At first, it was just a flicker, a momentary distortion in the reflection. Evelyn dismissed it as a trick of the light. However, as days passed, the flicker became a shadowy figure that seemed to move independently of her actions. One night, while brushing her hair, she caught sight of the figure behind her reflection. It was a dark silhouette standing just over her shoulder, with features too blurred to discern. The sight sent a chill down her spine. Evelyn's pulse quickened, and she hurriedly turned around, only to see an empty room. Confused and anxious, she rationalized it as an overactive imagination, perhaps fueled by too many late-night horror films. But deep down, a seed of fear had been planted. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn began to experience unsettling occurrences. The mirror, once a simple relic of family history, started to exhibit strange behaviors. At times, it reflected not only her present self but also fleeting images of an unfamiliar woman in period clothing. Other times, it showed scenes that did not belong in her modest apartment, a dark corridor, an old-fashioned parlor, and even glimpses of a moonlit garden that seemed to stretch out into oblivion. Desperate for answers, Evelyn scoured local archives and family albums. She learned that the mirror had been passed down through generations, rumored to be cursed. Family lore mentioned that the mirror was once owned by a distant relative who vanished without a trace after claiming it revealed the other side. Although Evelyn had never believed in ghosts, the eerie evidence made her question everything. One night, driven by both terror and curiosity, she set up a small video camera pointed at the mirror. The following morning, she reviewed the footage with trembling hands. What she saw made her blood run cold. At precisely 3:33 a.m., the mirror's surface rippled like water, and a figure materialized behind her reflection. The figure was that of a woman dressed in faded Victorian attire, her eyes dark and sorrowful. The woman raised a hand as if beckoning, then pointed directly at the camera before dissolving into static. Unable to sleep, Evelyn decided to confront the mystery head-on. She sat before the mirror and spoke aloud, "Who are you? What do you want from me?" For several agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Then, as if in response, the mirror's surface shimmered and the faint sound of a whisper filled the room. "Remember." The word repeated itself over and over, growing louder until it nearly overwhelmed her. In the ensuing days, Evelyn began experiencing vivid nightmares. In her dreams, she wandered through endless hallways lined with mirrors, each reflecting a distorted, ghostly version of herself. In one recurring dream, she found herself in a decaying mansion, the walls covered with peeling wallpaper and portraits of somber-faced ancestors. In the grand mirror of a long-forgotten ballroom, the same sorrowful woman appeared, her eyes pleading for help. Each morning, Evelyn awoke drenched in sweat, the word "remember" echoing in her mind. Haunted by the recurring phrase, she revisited her family's old journals. Hidden among yellowed pages was a faded entry written in a delicate hand. It spoke of a great-grandmother named Lillian, who once claimed the mirror showed her the shadows of the past. Lillian wrote that she saw visions of lost loved ones and tragic events that had been erased from family history. According to the journal, Lillian believed the mirror was a portal, a window into the memories and regrets of those who had passed. The entry ended abruptly, as if the writer had been interrupted by a sudden, overwhelming dread. Determined to understand the mirror's message, Evelyn sought the help of a local paranormal investigator, Thomas Reed. Thomas was known for his methodical approach to the supernatural, preferring logical explanations even when confronted with the inexplicable. When he arrived at her apartment, he carried an array of equipment, infrared cameras, voice recorders, and EMF meters. For hours, they observed the mirror, noting every flicker and whisper. At precisely 3:33 a.m., as had happened before, the mirror rippled and the figure of the Victorian woman reappeared. Thomas's equipment registered a spike in electromagnetic activity, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply. The recorded audio captured the faint, haunting phrase, "Remember," repeating in a disjointed, almost sorrowful tone. Thomas concluded that the mirror might be acting as a medium for residual energies, echoes of emotions and memories trapped in the fabric of the object. While he could not explain the phenomenon entirely, he suggested that unresolved grief and guilt could be anchoring these echoes to the mirror. For Evelyn, whose family history was riddled with long-buried tragedies and unspoken regrets, the suggestion was both comforting and horrifying. Over the next several weeks, Evelyn tried to come to terms with the mirror's influence. She began documenting everything: the eerie apparitions, the whispered words, the inexplicable changes in the reflection. She even set up an online blog, where she shared her experiences with a growing community of believers and skeptics alike. Many readers confessed similar encounters with mirrors and reflections that seemed to harbor dark secrets. The collective sharing of these experiences helped Evelyn realize that she was not alone. There were many who had felt the weight of memories they wished to forget. One stormy evening, as heavy rain pounded against her window, Evelyn sat before the mirror with a resolve to finally lay the past to rest. She spoke into the silence, recounting the pain and loss that had haunted her family for generations, the estrangement from lost relatives, the unsaid goodbyes, the regret over mistakes that could never be undone. With each word, the atmosphere grew denser, as if the mirror was absorbing every confession. Finally, as her voice faltered, the mirror's surface shimmered once more. In that final moment, the ghostly figure appeared clearly, her sorrowful eyes filled with both sadness and a glimmer of relief. The figure mouthed a silent, "Thank you," before vanishing into a cascade of light that slowly faded to black. In the days that followed, the mirror no longer flickered with shadowy apparitions. Instead, it returned to a quiet, ordinary reflection, a simple glass surface with no hint of the mysterious presence that had once haunted it. Evelyn wasn't sure if what she had done had truly set the spirit free, or if the mirror had merely become dormant. Nonetheless, she felt a deep sense of closure, a feeling that the burdens of the past had been acknowledged and released. Evelyn continued her work as a journalist, though she never forgot the lessons learned from that haunted mirror. Every now and then, when she passed by a reflective surface, she would pause, silently whispering, "I remember," as if to honor the memory of the sorrowful figure who had once reached out to her from beyond. On the outskirts of a sleepy town stood an old, abandoned playground. Once a bustling haven of laughter and innocent games, it had long been left to decay, its rusted swings and broken slides overtaken by nature. Locals whispered that at night, the playground transformed into a stage for eerie occurrences: distant giggles, the soft echo of a child's cry, and the rustle of unseen footsteps in the dark. A group of 4 lifelong friends, Jake, Maria, Liam, and Sophie, decided one crisp autumn evening to investigate the rumors. United by a shared fascination with urban legends and a dare to prove their courage, they met at the edge of the playground just as dusk settled over the town. As they approached the playground, the overgrown grass and tangled vines seemed to reach out like skeletal fingers. The once bright colors of the play equipment were faded and peeling. An oppressive silence hung in the air, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. Jake, the self-appointed leader, led the group to the old merry-go-round. "I bet this place holds a dark secret," he whispered, half joking, though a trace of apprehension colored his voice. The friends split up to explore different parts of the playground, their flashlights casting long, jittery beams through the gathering darkness. Maria ventured near a set of swings. As she reached out to touch one of the chains, a sudden chill ran through her. The swing began to move on its own, slowly at first, then with increasing momentum. It creaked and groaned as if pushed by an unseen force. Startled, Maria stumbled back, her heart pounding as she called for the others. Meanwhile, Liam and Sophie explored a small, dilapidated shed that once stored sports equipment. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and rust. In the corner of the shed, Sophie noticed an old, faded photograph pinned to the wall. The picture showed a group of children, smiling widely, gathered in front of the playground. The date on the photograph was from 1978. There was an eerie familiarity in their expressions, a look of both joy and foreboding. Before she could examine it further, a sudden noise startled them, the unmistakable sound of children's laughter echoing through the silent night. Gathering back at the center of the playground, the friends exchanged uneasy glances. They decided to set up a makeshift camp near the old sandbox, determined to document any paranormal activity. As the night deepened, the temperature dropped noticeably, and a thick fog began to roll in, shrouding the playground in an otherworldly haze. It was then that the laughter returned, soft and distant at first, but growing louder and more distinct. The sound was not playful but carried an undercurrent of sadness, as if it were the echoes of memories long past. Jake, holding his camera tightly, recorded the sounds while Maria clutched Liam's arm. Sophie, visibly trembling, whispered, "What are we dealing with here?" In the ensuing hours, strange events unfolded with a surreal intensity. Shadows moved in the corners of their vision, and fleeting figures, small, indistinct shapes resembling children, danced at the edge of the fog. The friends heard the pitter-patter of tiny feet running across the cracked pavement and saw swings moving in the wind, though no breeze stirred the air. At the stroke of midnight, the friends gathered around the old slide. In a sudden, bone-chilling moment, the ground beneath the slide began to tremble. Out of the darkness emerged a vision of a little girl, her face pale and eyes wide with sorrow. Dressed in tattered clothes and clutching a broken doll, she seemed to glide rather than walk. For several agonizing moments, she stood motionless, gazing directly at the friends as though pleading for help. Maria, overcome with emotion, stepped forward. "Who are you?" she called softly. The apparition's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she raised a hand, pointing toward the direction of an old, forgotten memorial near the edge of the playground. As quickly as she had appeared, the vision dissolved into mist. Compelled by the haunting image, the friends ventured toward the memorial, a crumbling stone plaque that bore the names of children who had perished in a tragic accident decades ago. The plaque was barely legible, but the dates and names were unmistakable. It seemed that many of the children lost their lives in a fire that had once ravaged the town's community center, a disaster that was quickly forgotten as time moved on. As the friends pieced together the fragments of history, they realized that the playground had once been a place of joy for these children, a sanctuary that had become marred by tragedy. The laughter and the spectral apparitions were not malevolent forces, rather, they were the residual echoes of a lost past, desperate for recognition and remembrance. In the early hours of dawn, as the fog began to lift, the paranormal activity subsided. The playground returned to its forlorn state, and the eerie laughter faded into the quiet murmur of the waking town. The friends, shaken but united by the experience, made a pact to honor the memory of those forgotten souls. They organized a small memorial service, inviting townspeople to share their own stories and recollections of the old days. The event rekindled the community's connection to its past and ensured that the tragic legacy of the lost children would not be consigned to oblivion. For Jake, Maria, Liam, and Sophie, that night on the abandoned playground changed their lives. They learned that some places hold memories so powerful that they transcend time, reaching out to remind us that every life matters, even those lost too soon. And as they continued on with their lives, the sound of distant laughter occasionally drifted on the wind, a bittersweet echo of a time when innocence was all that mattered. Daniel Price was an aspiring writer with dreams of crafting the next great horror novel. He spent countless hours in dusty libraries and second-hand bookstores, scouring for inspiration in forgotten tomes and rare manuscripts. One cold winter's day, while browsing in a secluded antiquarian shop in downtown Boston, he discovered a tattered, leather-bound manuscript hidden behind a stack of old poetry collections. Its title, embossed in faded gold letters, read simply, "The Cursed Manuscript." Intrigued by its ominous name and mysterious provenance, Daniel purchased the manuscript without hesitation. Back in his cramped apartment, Daniel began to pore over the manuscript's contents. The pages were filled with handwritten accounts of supernatural occurrences, strange rituals, and unspeakable horrors. The narrative was fragmented, as if pieced together from the ramblings of someone who had witnessed unimaginable terror. As he read, Daniel couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The stories within were disturbingly detailed, each account laced with a foreboding curse that warned of dire consequences for those who dared to repeat the rituals described within. At first, Daniel assumed it was all fictional, a work of art by a long-lost writer with a flair for the macabre. Yet, as he continued reading, he noticed chilling similarities between the events described in the manuscript and local legends he had heard as a child. One chapter recounted a series of bizarre deaths in a nearby town, while another spoke of a spectral figure haunting an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of the city. The manuscript even mentioned details that seemed too precise to be mere fiction, dates, names, and places that aligned with real events. Driven by both professional ambition and an insatiable curiosity, Daniel began researching the manuscript's references. He visited libraries, dug through old newspapers, and even interviewed locals whose ancestors had once been associated with the mysterious events. Each new piece of evidence confirmed the manuscript's accounts with eerie accuracy. Yet, as he delved deeper, strange occurrences began to plague him. His computer screen would flicker with inexplicable images of ghostly figures, the sound of whispering voices haunted him in the dead of night, and he found cryptic symbols scrawled on his walls, matching those in the manuscript. Late one night, while writing notes on his desk, Daniel felt an inexplicable chill. The manuscript lay open before him, and as he read a passage describing a ritual to summon a protective spirit, the room seemed to darken. A gust of cold wind swept through the room, scattering loose papers across the floor. In the midst of the chaos, he heard a faint, raspy voice whisper his name, as if it had been waiting for him all along. Paralyzed by fear, he clutched the manuscript to his chest and sat motionless until the storm outside subsided. Over the following days, Daniel's life began to unravel. He experienced vivid nightmares in which the horrific events from the manuscript played out in real time, visions of blood-soaked rituals, shadowy figures, and spectral wraiths roaming through desolate corridors. His once orderly writing process gave way to frantic scribbles, as if he were trying to document an unfolding prophecy. Friends and colleagues noticed his growing obsession, and some urged him to discard the cursed pages. But Daniel couldn't bring himself to let go. He was determined to uncover the truth behind the manuscript, even if it meant risking his sanity. One evening, Daniel decided to attempt the ritual described in one of the manuscript's final chapters, a ritual purported to grant the reader insight into the true nature of darkness. Armed with a circle of candles, a series of cryptic symbols drawn from the text, and a resolute determination, he set up the ritual in his study. As he chanted the incantation, the temperature in the room plummeted, and a low hum filled the air. The flames of the candles flickered violently, and shadows danced on the walls in grotesque patterns. For a brief, terrifying moment, Daniel felt as though he were standing on the threshold of another world. When the ritual abruptly ended, silence fell upon the room. Daniel opened his eyes to find the manuscript had vanished from his desk. In its place lay a single, brittle page on which was written a single sentence in trembling script: "You have invited us in." That night, his apartment was filled with inexplicable sounds, whispers in the dark, soft footsteps pacing in the hall, and an overwhelming sense of being watched by unseen eyes. Daniel's life was forever changed. The manuscript, it seemed, was not merely a collection of horror stories but a living curse, a malevolent force that had now taken root in his reality. As days turned into weeks, Daniel struggled to reclaim his sanity. He sought help from experts in the occult and paranormal investigators, but each attempt only deepened the mystery. The symbols from the manuscript began to appear everywhere, in the scratches on his windows, in the patterns formed by falling rain, and even in the reflections of everyday objects. The once promising writer was now tormented by visions of spectral figures, and his nights were filled with nightmares so vivid they blurred the line between sleep and waking. In one desperate bid for answers, Daniel reached out to an old professor of folklore and myth, Dr. Helen Carmichael. Helen, a stoic and knowledgeable scholar, agreed to help him decipher the manuscript's origins. Together, they traced its lineage back to a secretive cult that had flourished during the 18th century, a cult known for its brutal rituals and a belief in harnessing the power of fear itself. The manuscript was believed to be a grimoire, a compendium of dark rites and forbidden knowledge, passed down through generations as a curse to those who dared read it. Despite Helen's warnings, Daniel found himself unable to let go. The curse had woven itself into his life, and every attempt to escape only intensified its grip. His health deteriorated, friends drifted away, unable to bear the constant aura of dread that clung to him like a second skin. In the end, Daniel was left alone with his memories and the lingering echoes of the cursed words. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rumbled outside his window, Daniel sat at his desk one last time. With trembling fingers, he penned a final confession, a desperate, raw account of his descent into darkness and the horrifying truths he had uncovered. He sealed the confession in an envelope and left it on his doorstep before disappearing without a trace. The envelope was later found by a concerned neighbor, its contents sparking widespread discussion among those who followed his work. To this day, whispers persist about Daniel Price and the cursed manuscript. Some say he was consumed by the darkness he sought to understand, others claim he found a way to escape the curse, fading into obscurity as a cautionary tale. The legend of the cursed manuscript endures, a chilling reminder that some stories are best left unread, and some secrets are meant to remain buried.